So I will be talking, I missed most of the presentations because, as you know, the research life, we're always engaged in this writing proposals and so on. But I take that having talked about the sustainable development, the chemicals, and so on, the question also remains in the whole innovation sector that how do we get there? How do we mobilize all these ideas for us to achieve the sustainable development? So this is just recent work that we are working on, that we're trying to get to that answer as far as the policies that are being created, the skills that are being produced in the country and in the continent, or the skills that are even moving into the country from the rest of the world. So, so basically, my talk, as the topic said, that is about we're looking into what kind of skills are we looking for, or where are we as far as the skills are. And this talk really is taking the premise from that agreement that was done last year when we had the BRICS summit, where South Africa was granted the permission to or support to start producing their local vaccines. So, I mean, vaccines are very much important. We know that most of the deaths, particularly in Africa and in Asia, are preventable diseases such as diarrhea. I mean, like, we're losing about 500,000 per year to diarrhea with under 5-year-old children. And just here in Baragwanath Hospital in South Africa, just about 2 years or so ago, there was a study that was conducted on the impact of vaccine, and this study contained the subjects of the study. Some of them had HIV, some were HIV negative, whereby they were treated with the pneumonia-targeted vaccine, and there was an incredible and significant reduction in that. So that's just one of the classical examples that show us how important vaccines are. And I mean, like, vaccines, it's a really lucrative economic reviving or boosting activity. I mean, I think South Africa, the vaccine market or pharmaceutical market, it's around about 44 billion, and I stand to be corrected, colleagues. So now, with the importance really of that agreement for South Africa to start producing the vaccines, it's really that, particularly in Africa and Asia, that we experience stockouts. I think there was a stockout recently of one of the vaccines for that is scheduled for primary school learners. So availability is really a problem, and most of it's simply because of supply chain, and sometimes really it's not that Africa, we are not producing vaccines, but we are producing vaccines, but then the regulatory policy or the regulatory framework, it takes long. I mean, we are looking at about 18 years for us to get a vaccine into the system to be approved by the national regulatory authorities. So that is really a problem, and we cannot only be relying on one side of the supply, whereas, and so, I mean, like, Africa in total as a continent, we are producing less than 0.1 of vaccines worldwide, yet we are consuming about 89% of the world's stock. So really, in answering or in trying to probe what will make that agreement to be realized, we started by looking at by questioning what kind of human capital base do we have, and also trying to look at the policies in the country and in the continent. So policies such as the STISA 2024 does recognize production of vaccines, but then what is which is targeted for both communicable and non-communicable diseases. But because of HIV/AIDS, it's one of the most it's a disease that we are struggling with in the continent. We are also not aware of the numbers, for instance, with cancer. I mean, like, cancer, every now and then you're hearing that somebody has cancer, is living with cancer. So vaccines, there is no outright strategy or plan in the continent and in the country as far as vaccine production from the local government or the local countries. let me rather say, as to how we can achieve that. So STISA does mention that we need to produce vaccines, but I mean, like, you can do a word search on STISA and find out how many times you get the word vaccines, probably 3 times. As well as in the National Development Plan. I mean, like, the National Development Plan does talk about vaccine, but it's just one word if you go check on the National Development Plan. So we are not ready as a country from just giving you those few examples. So this is just a R&D survey that was conducted by the HSRC about 2015-16. So I'm just going to look at where we are sitting as far as the skills. So those are the percentages. So you realize that we are very strong in medical and health sciences. And medical and health sciences, that includes your public health, MBCHBs, and so on, followed by the engineering sciences, the applied sciences, technologies, chemical sciences, biological sciences, the physical sciences, as well as the material sciences. So the material sciences we are picking up. I think it's a very interesting fraternity. I'm not a material scientist myself, but I look forward to having the engagement on the material sciences. So when we look at the South African government sector expenditure over the years, you realize that over the years, there's been that fluctuation, and at the bottom there, those are the research fields, and then the rents there, it's really investment in about millions to about billions. So also with investment, you see that we are investing a lot in biological sciences and medical and health sciences and so on, and followed by the chemical sciences. So, and who is investing in this, in these skills? So we see that the business sector, it's investing quite well in the natural sciences, technology, and the engineering. So we are getting good investment towards our set or STEM skills. So this is just really in comparison to the BRICS nations as far as the percentage GDP investment towards research and development expenditure. So yes, South Africa is sitting right there, and India, it's right below South Africa. But it's quite interesting that with India being so, it's a big, they have a huge population compared to South Africa, and of course the economy is bigger than South Africa. Much as they're investing towards, with a smaller and a percentage towards the R&D, I think you'll see what is interesting about the India. And also, just briefly, within the BRICS, you see that the green, which represents the government, and then the blue, which represents the business, and then the other national resources and external funding. You see that Russian Federation, their government is putting a lot towards the R&D, followed by Brazil, and South Africa and China. Now, China is quite interesting that business is the one that is putting a lot of money towards R&D compared to government putting a lot of money towards R&D. So, what is the outlook as far as South Africa producing vaccine within the BRICS bloc? So, I mean, South Africa, we used to have the capacity to produce the vaccine prior about 1990s, and then by 1994, that capacity just went poof. So we have lost that capacity, and we used to produce the BCG, the tetanus toxoid, and DTP and OPV. So in the SSA, we know that Senegal is one of those countries that is producing vaccine. I think it's producing yellow fever. It's produced by Louis Pasteur Institute in Senegal. So South Africa, we have BioVac that was scheduled to start producing vaccines by 2013. So I don't know exactly whether it started or what the story is, but I know that there is a deal that was struck about last year with one of the international pharmaceutical companies. So, like I said, India, much as it's putting a lot, when you see the investment towards the R&D, it's just below South Africa, but it's been doing well. It's producing about 95% of the vaccines in the BRICS bloc. So all these other 4 countries within the BRICS, as you'll see, that they are producing vaccines which go to the Pan-African, I'll remember it, sorry colleagues. And all of them, they're really encompassing the 4 main functional areas that are required for vaccine production, which is clinical studies, the vaccine R&D, regulation and standardization, as well as the production. So just to look at some global production versus the BRICS production, I mean, you'll realize that by 1996, Brazil was producing about 1 vaccine. Come 2006, which is about a decade later, Brazil is still producing 1, but India is producing 7. India has added, again, by 2012, 6 years later again, it's added, or a decade later, it's added about 1 more vaccine that is producing. And 2013, about other countries in the BRICS bloc, they are all producing vaccines. I mean, like, Russia is producing vaccines and is doing well. However, there are issues with meeting the national regulatory authorities' requirements. So that's why you see their stock being so low. So India is, now, when we are looking at the number of manufacturers, you see that India now is sitting at about 10 by 2013, followed by China. If you remember the previous slide, China, I mean, like, it's still producing about 1 or few vaccines. It started off with nothing. China has the business sector investing in the skills that are required for producing these vaccines. Yeah, so the vaccines that are in the pipeline within the BRICS, I don't know if you can see properly from there, but as you can see that now the trials that are registered, and the registration of trials, it's very important, because if a country can undertake trials, it's showing the competence, it's showing the appetite, and it's showing the availability of infrastructure. So it means that we will be in a position to redirect where investment comes. If you look at South Africa, you see that we have about 38 clinical trials on new vaccines. But none of those vaccines, we don't hold any IP to it. That much as they are being conducted in the country, they are really not for South Africa. So it's just registered clinical trials in the country, but then it's not registered clinical trials that South Africa can have any claim towards. So just having looked at the few slides that are presented, so we can see that there is dynamic progress towards innovation and development within the BRICS bloc. And South Africa, I mean, it took a very good step in 2018 by wanting to step up as far as producing the vaccines. So, and I mean, like South Africa also, we have good infrastructure. I mean, like just here where we are gathered, I think it's a very good infrastructure. As you come in, I think you're seeing what's Sanofi? No, Novartis. So I think we really do have partners that we can leverage and that we can start interacting with. But I think of concern to me is that South Africa is not partnering with one of the BRICS companies. And it's very important for South Africa to start partnering with one of the BRICS companies that are producing or manufacturing these vaccines, because if you look at how India and Brazil did it, for example, Brazil had to trade off certain, they are able to produce the active pharmaceutical ingredients. They are able to innovate new chemical components that are required for vaccine production. But because they didn't have the skills, sufficient skills capacity to produce, and also the facilities that will meet good clinical practice, what they opted for was to trade the IP for their products in exchange for training, which they had to put a particular embargo on that IP so that they can have their skills, their human capital trained. So, and Currently in South Africa, then the argument really will be that, yes, we are putting money towards the R&D. And by the way, much as we are investing so much within the biological sciences, the health sciences, and so on, that is the skill that is mostly mismatched. So we are losing a whole lot of biological scientists, medical scientists, what you call this thing, engineer scientists and molecular biologists, because they do not get absorbed, and that is the skill that we are losing. So that is the skill that we need to protect and make sure that it can feed into the whole plan of producing the vaccines. So South Africa as a country, really, we are sitting at about a micro level where we do have the firms and we have that inter-firm networking. So we need to move up to the targeted policy of seeking to strengthen competitiveness in selected sectors. So, and that sector should be both in higher education and in business. So just one of secondary data that we collected. So you'll find that, I mean, South Africa also has been talking about increasing absorption of human capital that must be registered in the TVETs. So that is for producing the technical skills. And that is very much important, that we want to produce technical skills, because for us to develop that industry for vaccine or pharmaceutical production, it requires, it relies a lot on technical skills. It's not only on university-produced skills. So we do require to increase the TVET enrollment, and so that we can have those engineers and the artisans from the TVETs feeding into the whole industry development of pharmaceutical vaccine production. So this is really just to show us that we have, I mean, like we are not doing bad as far as having the engineers coming from the TVETs. We're looking at about 25% of the enrollments it must increase by 25%. Annually, and that is very good. It's just that now, what are we going to do with that skill once it exits? So vaccine and pharmaceutical development, it's a lucrative opportunity for South Africa to start investing in, and really using these skills together with what the BRICS are doing. So this is just an old graph that I like, that just shows the skills position in Africa. I mean, so it's not only South Africans that are producing high number of biological scientists, but I mean, like if you look at this graph, you'll realize that we are also producing the clinical medicine scientists. We are good in the biology. Data keeps on showing that we are good in that. We are good in chemistry, biomedical, public health, and so on. So we do have that capacity, but then we have to plan for that capacity. So this is just really from the SADC as far as where we are sitting with the skills. So it's just repetition and confirmation of the kind of skills we have. So in having shown that, it's evident that we have skills, but then most of the complaint that is coming is that the skills that we are producing is not trained sufficiently to meet the needs. But the problem is we can't now start testing that skill because we don't have that platform where we can have those skills tested. So it's neither here nor there. So the government needs to start driving this initiative of really galvanizing the skills within the STEM or the science engineering, and in order to fit into this driving the vaccine production. And also the policy environment. I think we really need to start developing a targeted policy that will make sure that these skills get absorbed, because if we don't have a targeted policy that will work hand in hand with the universities, although the university, their mandate is to produce educated or graduates, but if the policy environment does not accommodate those graduates, it will not help us in achieving that. So thank you very much. And by the way, yes, this is the work that we are looking to strengthen in particularly the methodology and start tracing how South Africa is doing, SADC is doing, and selected countries in Africa, so that we can produce concrete evidence as far as policy is concerned, evidence that will inform policy, evidence that we can start crafting policies that can work hand in hand with the BRICS networks and also with the local business networks that we have in South Africa. Thank you very much.